The little bell above the door of Antonio's coffee shop gave a final, tired jingle as the last customer of the afternoon shuffled out into the gray, cobblestone street. Inside, the air was thick with the warm, comforting smells of ground coffee and baking bread. For Sofia, this was the best part of the day, the quiet lull after the lunch rush, when the world seemed to slow down and she could work in peaceful solitude. She moved between the small, wooden tables, her cloth wiping away the last traces of the day, clearing crumbs and lonely coffee cups. She was a creature of quiet habit, her life a simple melody of work and rest. The shop was her world, and she knew every scratch on the counter, every creak in the floorboard. As she bent to clean a sticky spot near the window, her eye caught something tucked deep beneath the chair, hidden in the shadow. It was not a crumb or a piece of trash. It was a wallet, made of the finest black leather she had ever seen, sleek and serious-looking. Curious, she picked it up. It was surprisingly heavy in her small hand, feeling important and out of place in her humble shop. With careful fingers, she opened it. Her breath caught in her throat. It was not filled with the few coins and a single bill she was used to carrying. This wallet was packed with more money than she made in an entire year, neat, crisp bills that whispered of a world far removed from her own. Her heart began to beat a little faster. For a single, fleeting moment, a wild thought danced in her mind. This money could change everything. She could pay her rent for a year, buy a new winter coat, never worry about an empty pantry again. But Sofia was a good person, and the thought was gone as quickly as it came, chased away by the strong morals her grandmother had taught her. This money was not hers. It belonged to someone, and that someone was probably very worried. She searched the wallet for a name, an address, anything to identify its owner. There were no family pictures, no identification cards. Nothing but all that silent, intimidating money. Then, in a slim hidden pocket, her fingers found a single, stark white card. It was of thick, expensive paper. On it, printed in simple, severe black letters, was nothing but a telephone number. No name, no title, just 10 digits that felt like a secret. She looked around the empty shop. The old clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence. This was a decision. Walking over to the heavy, black telephone that sat on the back counter, she felt a strange sense of unease. This was not like calling a regular person. She picked up the receiver, its weight familiar in her hand, and dialed the number with a slightly trembling finger. It rang once, twice, and then was answered on the third ring. There was no friendly hello. There was only silence, and then a voice, a man's voice, deep and calm, but with an edge of steel that made the hairs on her arms stand up. Yes, was all he said. Sofia's own voice felt small and thin in comparison. Hello, she started, stumbling over her words. I found this wallet. At my work. Antonio's coffee shop. This number was inside. There was another long pause on the other end of the line, so complete she thought he might have hung up. She could almost feel him thinking, assessing her words. Then, the voice returned, not a question, but a command. The address. Give me the address of the shop. She gave it to him, her words tumbling out in a nervous rush. Do not leave, the voice instructed, its tone leaving no room for argument. Wait for me. And with a final, soft click, the line went dead. Sofia slowly placed the receiver back in its cradle, the click echoing in the quiet room. A cold trickle of fear ran down her spine. Who was this man? What had she just done? She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling very small and very alone in the cozy shop that, just moments ago, had felt like a safe haven. The world outside the large front window seemed darker now, the street empty and watching. She had no choice. She had to wait. And so she did, standing behind the counter, her eyes fixed on the door, listening to the frantic beating of her own heart, wondering what kind of storm her simple act of honesty was about to bring into her quiet, simple life. Time seemed to stretch and warp in the heavy silence of the coffee shop. Each tick of the old clock was a hammer blow against Sofia's nerves. She stood rigid behind the counter, her knuckles white as she gripped the polished wood, her gaze locked on the large window and the world beyond. The simple act of returning a lost item had never felt so dangerous, so charged with a terrifying sense of the unknown. The man on the phone had not sounded grateful. He had sounded like a king being informed of a subject's duty, his command to wait leaving a chill in the warm air. She thought about locking the door, about hiding in the back room, but a deeper, more primal instinct told her that disobedience would be a far greater mistake than any she had ever made. The sudden appearance of the automobile was so silent and swift it was as if it had materialized from the gathering dusk itself. It was a long, black motor car, its paint so deep and polished it seemed to swallow the fading light of the street. It moved with a predatory grace, gliding to a halt directly in front of the shop like a great beast coming to rest. For a long moment nothing happened. The motor car simply sat there, dark and impenetrable, its windows tinted to a shade that revealed nothing of the interior. Sofia's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This was not the vehicle of a merchant or a banker. This was a statement of power, a rolling fortress. The rear door opened, and a man unfolded himself from within. He was tall, his height accentuated by a long, dark coat of the finest wool that fell almost to his ankles. He moved with an unnerving economy of motion, each step deliberate and sure as he crossed the pavement. He did not look at the shop window. His focus was already inside, already on her. The little bell above the door gave a soft, almost apologetic chime as he pushed it open and stepped inside. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The cozy space felt suddenly small and cramped, the air growing thin and cold. He filled the doorway, his presence an immense, quiet weight that pressed down on everything, especially Sofia. He did not speak at first. His eyes, a shade of cool, piercing gray, swept the room in a single, assessing glance before settling on her. They were the eyes of a man who was used to seeing everything and revealing nothing. He saw the clean tables, the simple decor, the young woman frozen behind the counter, and he filed it all away. Slowly, he approached, his leather shoes making no sound on the tile floor. He stopped on the other side of the counter, close enough that she could see the precise cut of his clothes, the sharp line of his jaw, the absolute stillness of his expression. He placed the wallet she had left on a table for him into his coat pocket without even looking at it. "You are the one who called," he stated. His voice was just as it had been on the telephone, a low, calm rumble. But here, in person, it vibrated through the space between them, intimate and intimidating. Sofia could only manage a weak nod, her throat too tight to form words. "My name is Luca," he said, and the name was offered not as a friendly introduction, but as a simple fact, like stating the time or the weather. "I thank you for your honesty." The words were correct, polite even, but they were delivered with the formal chill of a business transaction, devoid of any genuine warmth. Then, his intense gaze deepened, studying her face with a disconcerting focus. It was not a glance of casual curiosity, it was an analysis. He was noting the fear in her eyes, the humble quality of her worn but clean dress, the way her hands trembled slightly where they rested on the counter. "What is your name?" he asked. "Sofia," she whispered. "Sofia," he repeated, and her name sounded different in his mouth, heavier, more significant. "Do you have a family here? A husband? Parents?" The questions were too direct, too personal. They felt like an interrogation. She shook her head, compelled to answer by the sheer force of his attention. "No. No one. It is only me." The truth of her loneliness tumbled out, laid bare before this formidable stranger. Luca absorbed this information, his head tilting almost imperceptibly. A long, heavy silence descended, broken only by the frantic pounding in Sofia's ears. He was weighing something, calculating a decision of immense importance right there in front of her. She felt like a specimen under a glass, her entire life and worth being judged in those few, endless seconds. Finally, he spoke, and the words he uttered were so absurd, so completely outside the realm of any possibility she had ever imagined that her mind refused to process them at first. "You have shown a rare quality," he began, his tone still impossibly even. "Honor. In my world, such a thing is valued above all else. You have placed me in your debt." He paused, his gray eyes holding hers captive. "To settle this debt, I can offer you protection. A life without worry. To do this, I offer you my hand in marriage." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The air rushed from Sofia's lungs. She stared at him, certain she had suffered some sudden break from reality. Marriage? This powerful, terrifying man, who smelled of expensive cologne and cold, night air, was asking her, a poor waitress with nothing to her name, to be his wife. It was not a romantic proposal. It was not even a question. It was a statement of solution, a bizarre and terrifying settlement of a count she never knew existed. Her simple act of returning a wallet had not just brought a man to her door, it had thrown her peaceful, predictable life into an abyss from which there seemed to be no return. The world outside the motorcar's window was a blur of gray stone and dimming light, a life Sofia was leaving behind without a true goodbye. She sat as far from Luca as the spacious leather seat would allow, her body pressed against the cold door, the weight of his presence a physical force in the silent cabin. He did not speak during the journey, his profile a stark, unmoving sculpture against the passing city. He was not a man who felt the need to fill silence with empty words, and the quiet was heavier than any noise Sofia had ever known. It was the silence of finality, of a decision made that could not be unmade. Her mind reeled, replaying the surreal scene in the coffee shop. His offer, if it could be called that, had been less a proposal and more a decree. When her shock had rendered her speechless, he had simply stated, "It is settled. Gather your things." There had been no discussion, no consideration of her feelings. In his world, it seemed, a decision once stated became law. The motorcar did not stop in a fashionable district of the city where other fine houses stood shoulder to shoulder. Instead, it passed through tall, iron gates that swung open soundlessly at their approach, traveling down a long, private drive lined with skeletal trees that clawed at the twilight sky. At the end of the drive stood the house. It was not a home, it was a fortress of pale stone, immense and severe, with rows of dark, unblinking windows. It spoke of old money and older secrets, a place built not for comfort, but for permanence and defense. The motorcar came to a stop before a grand entrance, and Luca emerged, not waiting for a driver to open his door. He stood, waiting for her, as a uniformed servant opened the heavy, carved door of the house from within, revealing a cavernous entrance hall. Stepping inside was like entering another world. The air was cool and still, smelling of beeswax and old stone. A vast marble floor stretched out before her, its surface so highly polished it reflected the dim light from a monstrous crystal chandelier hanging high above. Her footsteps, on the few steps she dared to take, echoed in the immense space, tiny and insignificant. The ceilings were impossibly high, lost in shadow, and the walls were adorned with dark, somber paintings in heavy gold frames. There were no cozy chairs, no scattered personal effects. It was breathtakingly beautiful in the way a museum or a cathedral is beautiful, meant to inspire awe, not warmth. Luca finally spoke, his voice echoing slightly in the hall. "This is my home. It is now yours. You will want for nothing." He gestured to a stern-looking woman in a dark dress who had appeared as if from the shadows. "This is Signora Rossi. She will see to your needs. You are tired. You will be shown to your room." Her room. The words promised a sanctuary, a place to breathe and think. What she was given was a chamber larger than the entire floor above the coffee shop. It was furnished with antiques, a vast bed with tall posts, a heavy armoire, a delicate writing desk. A large window, one of the many she had seen from the outside, looked out over the dark, sprawling grounds. The bed was turned down, and a simple, elegant nightdress of fine silk lay upon the covers, a stark contrast to her own worn cotton one. Later, a maid brought a tray of food, roasted chicken, soft cheese, crusty bread, a dish of olives. It was more food and of a finer quality than she usually ate in 2 days. She ate alone at the small table, the clink of her silverware loud in the ringing silence. This was the safety he had promised. This was the life without worry. So, why did she feel like she couldn't draw a full breath? The days began to bleed into one another, each a perfect, lonely replica of the last. She was a ghost in the great house, drifting through its majestic, empty rooms. Servers were always present, silent and efficient, meeting her every material need before she could even voice it. A new dress appeared in the armoire. A book of poetry was left on her desk. Yet Luca was almost always absent. Their paths would occasionally cross in the evening. He would summon her to dine with him in the formal dining room, a table long enough to seat 20 stretching between them. The meals were exquisite, served on fine china, but the conversations were a barren landscape of politeness. He would ask if her room was comfortable, if the food was to her liking. He would answer her timid questions about his day with vague, non-committal replies about business or meetings. He was always watching her, his gray eyes missing nothing, but he was a closed book, his thoughts and feelings locked away behind a wall of impeccable manners and controlled power. She was living in a gilded cage. The bars were made of silk and marble, but they were bars all the same. She had everything she had ever lacked and nothing she had ever truly had: freedom, connection, purpose. The kindness she had shown in returning a wallet had not led to gratitude, it had led to a transaction. She was now a kept woman, a prize collected to settle a debt of honor, living a life of luxurious isolation, wondering if the man she was bound to would ever see her as anything more than a symbol of his own code, or if she would forever be just a lonely echo in the vast, silent halls of his fortress. The suffocating silence of the great house was, Sofia came to understand, a lie. It was not a place of peace, but of suspended violence. The truth of Luca's world, a world she had only glimpsed through his vague words and the fearful deference of the servants, began to seep through the cracks in the marble like a slow, cold draft. It announced itself in the quiet intensity of the guards who patrolled the grounds, their eyes constantly scanning the tree line. It was in the way Signora Rossi would sometimes glance nervously out a window before drawing the heavy velvet curtains closed as dusk fell. Sofia was not a prisoner, she was told, but the immense iron gates at the end of the drive remained perpetually closed, and the few walks she was permitted to take in the sprawling gardens were always observed from a respectful, yet firm, distance. It was on one such walk, a rare sunny afternoon that dared to be cheerful, that the illusion was finally and brutally shattered. She had strayed towards the edge of the formal garden, where the manicured hedges gave way to a wilder copse of trees, enjoying the simple, unorchestrated beauty of it. A man emerged from the shadows of the trees. He was not one of Luca's men. His smile was too easy, his eyes too bright with a predatory gleam. "Signorina," he said, his voice slick as oil. "My employer, Marco, sends his regards. He believes you would be more appreciative of his hospitality." Before she could scream, another man materialized behind her, his grip like iron on her arm. The world tilted, the sunny afternoon twisting into a nightmare. She was being pulled, dragged back towards the trees where a nondescript motor car waited, its engine running. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped thing. This was the danger Luca had spoken of, no longer an abstract concept but a terrifying, physical reality. The response was immediate and brutal. It did not come from the main house, but from the very landscape itself. Two of Luca's guards, who had seemed to be mere statues in the distance, were suddenly upon them, moving with a lethal, silent speed. There was no shouted challenge, no drawn-out confrontation. It was a swift, vicious explosion of motion. The sound of a fist connecting with a jaw was a sickening crack. A man grunted in pain. The grip on her arm vanished as her assailant was pulled away, and she stumbled to her knees on the soft grass, watching in paralyzed horror as the two intruders were subdued with a terrifying efficiency. It was over in less than a minute. The men who had tried to take her were gone, dragged away into the shadows from which they came, and the only evidence that remained was a scuff mark on the path and the frantic beating of Sofia's heart. She was led back to the house, trembling so violently she could barely walk. The servants attended to her with a new, palpable tension in their movements, their silence now heavy with unspoken fear. She sat in her room, the elegant furniture feeling like a mockery, and waited. The sun set, painting the sky in fiery hues that did nothing to warm the cold dread in her soul. It was fully dark when she finally heard it, the firm, quick tread of his footsteps in the hall, a sound she had come to recognize amidst the quiet of the house. Her door opened without a knock. Luca stood there, framed in the doorway. He had discarded his suit jacket, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows. And on his knuckles, stark against his skin, was the dark, unmistakable smear of dried blood. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, his usual composure gone, replaced by a raw, simmering intensity that seemed to make the very air crackle. He didn't ask if she was all right. He didn't comment on the tear tracks she knew were on her cheeks. Instead, he stopped directly before her, his gaze burning into hers. He reached out, his movements surprisingly gentle, and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. His touch was a shock, the first truly human contact he had ever initiated. His eyes, usually so cool and detached, were now the color of a storm-racked sea, churning with a terrifying emotion. His voice was low, a gravelly whisper that was more threatening than any shout. "Did they touch you?" he asked, the words laced with a possessiveness so profound it stole her breath. "Tell me exactly what happened. Did they hurt you?" When she shook her head, her voice a mere whisper of a no, something in his face shifted. The storm in his eyes did not calm, but it focused, narrowed onto a single, terrible point. The gentleness in his hands remained, a bizarre contrast to the violence in his gaze. "Listen to me, Sofia," he said, his voice dropping to an even deeper, more intimate register, each word a solemn oath carved in stone. "No one will ever frighten you again. No one will lay a hand on you. This I swear to you. What happened today will be answered. It ends now." In that moment, he was not the polite, distant stranger she dined with. He was something ancient and primal, a king defending his territory, a force of nature vowing retribution. And for the first time since she had entered this gilded cage, the fear she felt was not for herself, but for anyone foolish enough to have earned the wrath of the man who now looked at her as if she were the most valuable thing in his entire world. The great house did not simply return to its former silence after the attack. It transformed into something else entirely, a place humming with a quiet, purposeful energy. The change began with Luca himself. The distant, formal man who had treated her as a guest in his home was gone, replaced by a figure of fierce, unwavering attention. He no longer absented himself on vague business for days on end. Now he was a constant, if still quiet, presence. He began to take his meals with her not as a duty, but as a ritual, his questions shifting from polite inquiries about her comfort to genuine curiosity about her thoughts, her childhood memories, the books she was reading. He listened, his storm-gray eyes fixed on her, as if her every word was a vital piece of a puzzle he was determined to solve. He started to share fragments of his own world, not the dark and dangerous parts, but the weight of it, the responsibility of leading so many, the constant, grinding pressure of decision-making. He was, she realized, allowing her to see the man beneath the crown, the human being who carried the burden of being a king. This new intimacy bloomed slowly, like a flower unfurling in a sheltered garden. He began to seek her out simply for her company, finding her reading in the library and sitting in a chair opposite her, the silence between them now a comfortable, shared thing rather than an empty void. He showed her the hidden corners of the estate, a sun-drenched courtyard she never knew existed, a bench overlooking a quiet pond where he would sometimes come to think. It was in these small, stolen moments that Sofia saw the careful construction of his control, the tiny cracks through which his true self emerged. She saw the weariness after a long day, The faint smile that would touch his lips at a simple observation she made, the way his hand would sometimes, almost unconsciously, brush against hers as they walked. The cage was still gilded, but the door was now open, and the keeper was looking at her not as a possession, but as a partner he longed to invite inside. The final wall between them crumbled one evening under a sky dusted with a million stars. They were standing on the grand terrace, the lights of the distant city twinkling like fallen stars. The air was warm and carried the scent of night-blooming jasmine from the garden below. Luca turned to her, his profile etched in the moonlight, and the usual mask of composure was gone, replaced by a raw, breathtaking vulnerability. "Sofia," he began, his voice softer than she had ever heard it, laced with an emotion that made her heart clench. "When I came to that coffee shop, I was a man who saw the world in transactions. Debts to be paid, alliances to be forged. I asked for your hand to settle a score, to honor a code." He paused, turning fully to face her, his gaze holding hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "But you, with your quiet strength and your honest heart, you have undone me. You have taken my world of black and white and filled it with color." He reached for her hand, his fingers lacing through hers, his touch sending a jolt of warmth through her entire being. "I no longer want you to stay because of honor or debt. I want you to stay because you choose to, because you could perhaps learn to love me. You are not a transaction, Sofia. You are the best thing I have ever found." Tears welled in Sofia's eyes, but they were tears of a joy so profound it felt like a healing. The loneliness, the fear, the confusion, it all melted away under the heat of his sincere, hard-won confession. She saw not the terrifying mafia boss, but the man who had been just as trapped as she was, a prisoner of his own power and isolation. She saw his honor, not as a cold code, but as a deep, unwavering loyalty that he was now offering to her, and her alone. She squeezed his hand, a true, radiant smile finally breaking through. "Yes, Luca," she whispered, her voice clear and sure. "My answer is yes." For a moment, they simply looked at each other, two lost souls who had miraculously found a home in one another's hearts. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers, a silent vow passing between them in the quiet night. But in Luca's world, peace was always a fragile, fleeting thing. Just as he moved to pull her into an embrace, the moment was shattered by the frantic sound of footsteps rushing onto the terrace. One of his most trusted men, a man named Carlo, stood there, his face pale and slick with sweat, his chest heaving. The look in his eyes was one of pure, unvarnished alarm. "Luca, sir," he gasped, his voice tight with a panic that was utterly foreign in the controlled environment of the house. "Forgive the interruption, but a message, it just came. We have found her." He swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously towards Sofia for a fraction of a second before locking back onto his boss. "The woman from your past, Isabella, she has returned to the city. And search, she is not alone." The name Isabella hung in the air like a shard of ice, and Sofia felt Luca's entire body go rigid beside her. The softness in his face vanished, wiped away in an instant, replaced by a mask of cold, hard stone. The peaceful world they had just built together trembled on its foundation, threatened by a ghost from a past she could not possibly understand. The story of Sofia and Luca is far from over, dear listener. New alliances have been tested and a love has been forged in fire, but now a shadow from the past has emerged, threatening to tear it all apart. The question is no longer about honor or debt, but about secrets and survival. If you wish to follow Sofia and Luca into the next chapter of their dangerous and passionate story, to uncover the mystery of Isabella and the new threat that looms on the horizon, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Do not miss a single moment of the drama that is yet to unfold.